I never wanted to be an entrepreneur. My father was an entrepreneur, and I saw his life and I'm like, this is a terrible thing. I just want to be a professional and I want to get a paycheck and I want to put money into my 401k and I don't want to deal with all the crap that goes with this. But maybe there's a gene that clicked in.
3, 2, 1. Liftoff.
Welcome to the Ketamine Startup Podcast. This is where we talk about how to start up a ketamine infusion clinic, how to market it, and more. And speaking of taking that leap, have you ever felt like you're standing alone with a vision others don't understand? Like colleagues who are questioning your direction, or family or friends who just don't see what you see? Well, this episode is a special compilation featuring 3 remarkable physicians who felt exactly the same way, but were driven by their vision and eventually shaped the fields we work in today. We interviewed Dr. Howard Kornfeld, who advocated for buprenorphine treatments years before it became standard practice. We also featured Dr. Joe Tafur, who bridges traditional ceremonial medicine and modern ketamine therapy. And Dr. Mel Herbert, founder of MRAP, who revolutionized medical education globally. We cover how these physicians faced pushback from colleagues, challenged medical orthodoxy, and ultimately transformed their respective fields by refusing to give up on what they believed in. Each of these doctors proved that individual practitioners can create lasting change when they persist through doubt. We learned a lot from these stories and hope you do too. Now let's jump into the episode.
To paraphrase something that Margaret Mead once said, that a small number of people working together can actually make significant change, And if you're at the right time and the right place and you lever the right kind of insights, So I dove into addiction medicine, because I had just certified in it, and I was still practicing emergency medicine, but it got to where I met a leader in addiction medicine. His name was Alex Stallcup. He was quite a wonderful mentor to me, and he had already been through his own political activism. He was one of those doctors during the Vietnam War that brought napalm-burned children, over from Vietnam to be treated here. And of course, not only help them, but open up the eyes of the American people to let's end this Vietnam War, before we do more harm. So he was an activist, and he was a guy who was a pediatric pulmonologist originally, but he had been hanging around San Francisco, and there was a group called Rock Med, which was doctors who went to like Grateful Dead concerts and others, who took care of people who were tripping and, who had bad trips and everything. So he was a cool guy, and he decided, well, I'm going to just do addiction medicine, even though I'm in this other specialty. And he brought a very keen mind to the field. And he was a leader in benzodiazepine dependency, and I became knowledgeable. But we were getting a lot of opiate, cases. This was even before OxyContin, right before OxyContin came in. It was starting to build up with other things like Vicodin, Percocets, and then all of a sudden OxyContin started to come in. And we thought on one level, well, this might be a good thing because there's so many people in pain, and OxyContin was going to be a long-acting, it was going to be, this could help get people off of Vicodin, there was all kind of misconceptions and ideas around. But then also, he heard about this drug called buprenorphine, which is commonly referred to as Suboxone, which is one of the brand names. So we started to treat both addiction and pain at the same time, because a lot of the pain cases that were spinning out of control with Vicodin and with they had long-acting morphine around then, MS-Contin, and this is when the Duragesic patches, the fentanyl patches were coming in, and even fentanyl lollipops, everybody was using them, it was a wild, wild west, and there was more and more opiate addiction. And yet we heard that there was this incredible drug named buprenorphine, but it wasn't really available yet. It was, and yet we heard that in France they were using it for addiction and were making tremendous progress, and then so we didn't quite understand what was going on, and then we discovered that the buprenorphine was actually FDA approved in the U.S., but as a shot for acute pain, and it had been approved for the last 15 years, since 1981, but it was very rarely used, and so we put two and two together with the help of some other doctors, and we said, we could use this in a compounded way that people could put into their mouth, because it wasn't a drug that was well absorbed in the stomach. You had to absorb it mucosally in the oral cavity, or it can be injected too. So we started to use this for our pain cases, and it really helped stabilize them. But we were warned you can't use it for addiction only, because of these old laws that go back 100 years, that came around with the heroin emergence 100 years ago. There were prohibition laws set in that made it illegal for doctors to actually treat addiction, with an opiate. And those laws to some degree still exist, so if now we have buprenorphine and we have methadone, so we don't have to worry about it. But the only way to treat opiate dependency before methadone and buprenorphine was to give someone a different opiate so they didn't go into full-blown withdrawal, But anyone with an opiate addiction was considered almost a criminal, And so I started to put two and two together. Well, maybe this is why our system is so skewed against psychedelics, because there's some deep, really very deep stigmas and criminalizations of anyone with any kind of drug issue. And I started to think, why is our society so awkward and not sophisticated, about these things? And it started to dawn on me that, well, maybe because we separate mind and body, you know what I mean? Because we're rooted in that old system, of mechanistic reductionist thinking, and so I started to read this biological theorist and anthropologist named Gregory Bateson, who was married to Margaret Mead at one point, and a wonderful book came out not so long ago called Tripping on Utopia, by Benjamin Breen, that highlighted Margaret Mead and Gregory Bateson's involvement with psychedelics way back to around World War II, and how, LSD was first brought to the United States actually in around 1949, to be used in certain hospitals, and of course then the military took charge of a whole wing of that research, because we were afraid that the Soviet Union was getting an edge on us. They had developed their own atomic bomb, and it was, we needed to use these psychedelics as tools of mind control, or tools for espionage, or psychological warfare. So that's another reason that psychedelics got such a bad start, because so much of it was for control and for, in a way, punishing rather than for healing, But back to buprenorphine, here we had a tool that could really help. We had methadone already for opiate addiction in the 1990s, but buprenorphine we didn't have yet. And the methadone was very peculiar. You had to go to it was like a little bit of branch of the criminal justice system. You know what I mean? You had to go to a clinic that had like almost barbed wire around it, you know what I mean? And you had to like show up and you got your dose and you know what I mean? And it was very regimented. And this was how we were treating, one of the major problems of the 20th century, which is the heroin addiction epidemic, which was starting to fill up our jails with people who had never been there before. Our whole criminal system was expanding. So we figured out a way to use buprenorphine legally as long as we were a little bit careful. If we treated addiction patients, they also had a pain condition. And the reality is that after a certain age, everyone has some kind of pain. So, we felt we were doing the right thing and following our ethical, oath, so to speak, as doctors. So we started to treat pain and addiction at the same time. And then I learned that the whole pain specialization was just gelling, and that you could, after doing this for 10 years, they were still allowing, if you had 10 years of experience, in pain medicine and could document continuing education, you could take the pain boards that were, again, ABMS certified, the highest certification. So that's how I got my third board. And so we were early adopters of the buprenorphine. The FDA didn't approve it for another like 7 or 8 years. By that time, we were already experienced in using it. And then nobody really started using it for another 5 or 8 years. So we were like 10, 15 years ahead of everyone else using buprenorphine. And, so I was busy, and it was easy to kind of put some of the global problems aside for a moment, and concentrate on this.
Hey, listeners, this is Kim, and I just want to acknowledge that you're here for a reason. Maybe you're stuck in a cycle of long shifts, feeling a little burnt out, and wondering if there's any other way to practice medicine, especially on your own terms. We've been there, and that's exactly why we created this free checklist, your step-by-step roadmap to starting a ketamine clinic without those costly mistakes. Grab your copy now at www.ketaminestartup.com/checklist. It's completely free because we want you to succeed, not struggle. And hey, if you're driving or mid-workout, don't sweat it. Just check out the show notes for the link when you're ready. And again, that's www.ketaminestartup.com/checklist. Now let's get back to the episode.
I remember for me, when I was opening up the ketamine clinic, this is in 2016, 2017, where I was just thinking about it. And I was telling my colleagues in the ER, hey, I want to open this up. Like, they would make fun of me. Been a mild-mannered, ketamine co, he's giving more ketamine in the ER. So I did notice that there was resistance from some of my colleagues, but there was a little bit of a challenge there.
Sure.
But now with the data, it's, hey, and you had mentioned you saw the results physically.
Yeah.
That's proof in the pudding.
Yeah. It's proof in the pudding. So then it's ignorance is what you're dealing with. And so like people that want to put an extra layer on their ignorance of, I don't know, making fun of somebody or maligning them, or that's just, what are you doing? Apparently, you don't know. It can just poke fun. It's like with your old colleagues, and that can be fun. But it can be hurtful when you're really trying to do something that's meaningful to you. But at the end of the day, that's what's driving the boat. And that's why I said these other colleagues who are like, I felt like they were just more down-to-earth people, some of the people I was working with, and they're like, wow, they wanted to hear about, oh, you guys can help somebody with that. Oh, how'd you do that? And so I think that's ultimately what drives the thing. That's what drives medical care. You have all the resistance, all the different forces, all the mindsets, all the profit margins and all those players, but the marketplace is going to, at least it's going to be a major influence, maybe not the only influence at all. Of course it's not, but it will be a major influence is results. And so that's what it is. And so if you are bringing results, and if you're not, you're going to have to catch up. No matter how much you make fun of the other people or try to make your case, eventually you don't take your car to the place that doesn't know how to fix the car just because they have the cocky attitude. Maybe for a while you might do it, but not over and over again. No, you won't.
Yeah, good point. The results do matter.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really amazing because I feel like you're a pioneer in this space. And as a result, you literally wrote a book. I've actually read it 2 times. It's called Fellowship of the River. So literally, this was Joe's fellowship that he did on the river and sharing a lot of patient experiences and stories, as well as personal stories. So I highly recommend that the listeners and viewers please buy the book and read it because it's very insightful. I do want to fast forward because you're actually working not only with ayahuasca, but also with ketamine therapy. So tell us about how you transitioned and incorporated that into your practice.
Yeah, I've been spending more time in the States. Like as of about 2017, I stepped away from being a primary business partner at Niue Rao in Peru. So I spent more time. I put out my book, and I was like interested in sharing about what I had learned, spending more time out of the jungle. And that I got exposed. Then I'm back at the MAPS conference, getting exposed to the new update of what's going on in psychedelics, and seeing getting connected to the MDMA research people, being part of the. And then we started our research project, our epigenetics research project, with the MAPS study to get saliva swabs on people going through the MAPS MDMA trial. So I was getting more and more exposed to and connected to the MAPS MDMA therapists in the different centers and because there's multiple centers across the country, and seeing that a number of them, and getting to know them and talking to them, that they were seeing that these big results that they were having in the psychedelic psychotherapy intervention, this technique that they were developing of doing therapy with their thing was very focused on therapy catalyzed by the MDMA, and seeing that they were trapped in the study protocol and that they had to then they had to sit through the placebo. That's half of what they have to do to be part of this project and to help bring this change. And they're getting frustrated. They want to practice what they've been learning, and they started talking about what we get with ketamine. You could use that they found they had similar kind of possibilities of bringing ketamine into their therapy protocols that they were doing. And so that was the first time I got exposed to that. I had heard when I was at UCSD in the hospice, rotation, when I was a medical student, even back then, in early 2000, 2001, 2002, I had heard that they were exploring, they found some antidepressant effects of ketamine in the hospice, or somebody was getting it for some kind of intervention, and then they felt this lift. So I'd heard about it, and I remember hearing that when in medical school, that you as an ER doctor, where you use it for this dissociative anesthesia effect to do certain procedures on people, that they might journey. That maybe that dosing is different, but that once in a while you might run into somebody that had some kind of journey experience, and you just tell them, "Oh, don't worry, it's just the ketamine. Don't let it go." Or if it was the children, it was just like a dream. So I knew about that. I didn't know that much about it. And then I got invited to be on the board of Prati Group, which is a nonprofit in Colorado. And they wanted to have a diverse board, and they asked me with my ayahuasca, all that experience, if I would want to be on the board. And then to be on the board, they said, you get the free training. You can go through the ketamine training. And I had already been through the MAPS MDMA training through another speaking opportunity or whatever. They invited me to that. So I went through it. I went through their weekend training, and I saw what happened with everybody at the retreat. And I was like, whoa, this is really interesting. And just talking to the people working there and getting exposed to the work they're doing with patients, and seeing that they're really, these guys, again, back to the same thing. These are the MDMA MAPS therapists. They have this evidence-based track record. They're really turning people around with PTSD in ways that nobody has. And these guys are saying, this is working for us with ketamine too. So that legitimacy based on their track record was like very intriguing to me. And then seeing what they could do. And I had the experience of myself on ketamine in the training of seeing how, yes, it's like this big opening. And then from my ceremonial experience, I just felt it's a big opening. And that I thought, from my whatever training in Peru and everything, I thought, hey, if you brought a certain amount of spiritual structure to this, you could probably do some of the same things. And so then somewhere along the lines, then we were trying to come up with here in Arizona, coming up with some kind of group retreat that we wanted to work on with Native Americans. And we were trying to come up with a protocol that would be more culturally oriented, maybe bringing medicine people in, or maybe we're going to chat during the effects of the medicine. And we were just thinking about that. And we had talked to a retreat center. Yeah, we were putting together with my community here. And then Naropa University, who I have friends that were working there. And they said, we want our students to have an experience. We want our students to have an experience. And would you put together some kind of retreat with ketamine, but like with ceremonial, cultural kind of aspects that would suit this community? So then we did that. That was the first time that I think that was the first time that I sat with somebody on ketamine. But it wasn't just me. We had a nurse practitioner who was running a clinic where they're using ketamine. So she was the provider. So she's the experienced one. And then I'm there to sing and support the people through the process.
Not only did you do the academic side and clinical side, but then, I mean, this is one of the things you are extremely well known for is MRAP. So how did MRAP come into fruition, and how did you launch that? Because I assume that must have taken a bit of courage, taking a leap into the entrepreneurial world.
Yeah, I never wanted to be an entrepreneur. My father was an entrepreneur, and I saw his life and I'm like, this is a terrible thing. I just want to be a professional, and I want to get a paycheck, and I want to put money into my 401k, and I don't want to deal with all the crap that goes with this. But maybe there's a gene that clicked in. I don't know. But as I was saying, the postgraduate education in the US was so good. I would send back tapes, little tapes to my friends back in Australia, like, here's some recorded tape from Grand Rounds today. And they would be like, send us more, send us more. It's so good. So I started recording that stuff. And then I just had this thought, like, I want to record all of the best lectures. It's not fair that UCLA has like the best training or USC has the best training and the rest of us throughout the world don't get that. So at some point, it got into my head, I want to capture the best lectures, not just at UCLA, USC, but across the country, across the world, edit them, and then represent them for everybody. And so Rick Picutta was my mentor, and he'd had Emergency Medical Abstracts, which was a review of the literature every month. He was very entrepreneurial. So I got into business with Rick and told him, this is what I want to do. He said, no, Mel, I don't want to do that. And so I went to Audio Digest, and I almost did this big deal with Audio Digest, but then in the end, like, well, we don't know how it's going to make money, because I was thinking about doing residency training. And then I went back to Rick, like, Rick, help me out, bro. I'm going to do this with or without you. He's like, all right, let's do it. And so that's when we started MRAP in the early 2000s, 2001. And we did exactly that model, which we took lectures that were at USC or actually at UCLA at the time, or lectures that I created myself. And then we started recording people giving lectures at different conferences around the country and editing them, which was a pain in the butt in 2001 because the programs were super slow, and I would like edit out this and it would take 30 seconds. Now it's like instant. It was like take forever. But it became really successful very quickly over a few years. And then I just kept reinvesting the money and making it better and better and better. And it went from a little tiny program and we expanded it out. So the history of it is that, it was a 20-year overnight success. It started small, but got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, expanded out, textbooks, more audio, more faculty. We actually stopped recording conferences because we found that the expense to quality ratio was terrible. We would go and spend lots of money, record a 20-hour conference, and only about an hour of it would be usable for various reasons. So we sort of moved it back into, let's find the best speakers and record them via Skype. Remember Skype back in the day?
Mm-hmm.
And now we do it via Zoom and all these other things. But now we basically collect the best faculty and have them do it sort of in a studio-like setting, even though it's a remote studio. So we've gone through the whole sort of process. And it started off with tapes, literal tapes, then CDs, and then we got rid of both of those, and now it's just all online. I don't know what's next. Maybe we'll just beam it directly into your head. I don't know.
Get the Neuralink implanted into the brainstem.
Exactly.
All right. So then, after your kind of illustrious career, educational career, everything happening, you made another transition. And specifically, I remember listening to your ASEP 2018 keynote conference, and you were mentioning, hey, I'm going to hang up the white coat. And so,
Mhm.
how did you decide? You're like, you know what? I've had enough. Like, what was that decision process for you?
Well, with all of these stories, there's the long version and the short version. So I'll give you the short version because the long version goes for weeks. But when I was a resident, emergency medicine stressed me. I loved it. I loved it. But it also stressed me. Every miss, every patient, I would be like, what am I missing? Are they going to come back tomorrow? So I really took to heart every miss. And there are some people that are very confident who go into shifts and they're just like full of swagger and confidence. And I wasn't one of those guys. El Ciccati and I talked about this. Like Billy Mallon goes into a shift and he's energized and he's like fired up. And at the end of the shift, he's got more energy than at the beginning. And I came out at the end of each shift, wrung out, done. Oh my God, I'm just like, ah. So I remember saying to my residency director when I was a chief resident at UCLA, how do I retire at 50? Because I can tell that I'm not going to be able to do this into my 60s and 70s like some people. So we talked a lot about finances and putting money away, and I was aggressive about making sure that I could retire at 50 if I got to 55 or whatever and couldn't do it. By the time I got to 50, I found nights really difficult. I had a lot of PTSD about all of the patients working at a big trauma center. You see terrible stuff. I missed stuff. People died. So, and MRAP was becoming really popular. And so then I could live off MRAP. And I remember being at a shift in the resuscitation suite with a sick kid, and we resuscitated the kid, but I was distracted because I was thinking about all the business stuff, all the education stuff I would do. And that's when I realized I think my time being a clinician is over. If I'm this distracted in front of such a sick kid, then it's probably time for me to leave. I never wanted to be that attending that stayed too long. If you train in emergency medicine in the US, I think we all had that experience of there's a couple of attendings that should have retired 5 years ago, and you as the senior resident know more than them, better than them, and they kind of get in the way. I'm like, I never want to be that person. So I always thought I'd like to leave a little bit early than a little bit late. So I retired clinically in the US at 50, and although I still, even now, that's 10 years ago, still get this desire, well, maybe I should go back because I really do miss it. It was the right thing to do for me psychologically to leave. It was super hard, and I became a little depressed because of it. And I remember talking to Greg Henry and Jerry Hoffman and all these legends before me had done the same, and Peter Rosen. They all went through the same thing. It's like when you hang up that coat, a big part of you dies because being a clinician is such the highest level of emergency medicine. There's lots of different types of emergency medicine you do, but seeing patients and taking that responsibility on, and that's huge. So hanging up that coat's associated with a significant existential crisis for most of us. So that's what I did in, about 10 years ago, just before that ASEP talk.
And once you hung up the white coat and you said, "Hey, I'm transitioning out," was it, daiquiris on the beach? Were you just like loving it? Or because you did mention, hey, this was kind of an existential crisis and a part of your identity. Or was it, tell us about that challenge post retirement?
Well, I didn't stop working. I was working full time on education, creating MRAP, continuing MRAP. At the time, had Essentials of Emergency Medicine, which was the big conference in emergency medicine. So I was working constantly, which was good. It was a great distraction. I was still very involved in the residency. I was still giving lectures, but I stood down from the role of the voice of MRAP. One of my other philosophies was that whoever's doing the hosting of MRAP should be a clinician who's still seeing patients. Again, my bias was I'd seen people become talking heads decades after they'd finished practicing, pretending that they were still seeing lots of patients. And I'm like, I don't want to do that. So that was also very difficult because at that same time, I need to step down as the voice of MRAP, which I'd been since the beginning, and hand it off to people who were still seeing patients. And so that was difficult, but I was still involved and I still felt like I could do some of the education. I just couldn't be up the front saying, well, when I see these patients, because I don't anymore. So I kept myself very busy. It was very difficult, but I still kept myself busy doing that stuff. And then we started our nonprofit, and then I got to work overseas. I did a lot of work, Chile and Africa, and so I still do that every year. Get to go and do rounds and see crazy patients and tuberculosis, but in a very different environment. There's no charting, there's no computers, there's no lawsuits. It's just like back in the old days, like you and the patient, a written note, hands on the shoulders, doing the best you can. So I really enjoy that type of medicine now.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Ketamine Startup Podcast. If you found this compilation valuable, we'd really appreciate it if you'd leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It helps other entrepreneurial medical professionals discover the show and grow this community. For show notes, resources, and links to the individual episodes with Dr. Kornfeld, Dr. Tafur, and Dr. Herbert, visit our website at ketaminestartup.com/podcast. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.